Hey everybody, good morning. It's Albert Loiza, the athletic counselor here at COC, joined with one and only Matt Crater, our TLC athletic mentor and assistant football coach. And today we have Robert Wonser from our sociology department. Robert, you can say hello.
Hello, nice to be here.
So Robert's been with us at COC for 12 years. He is currently involved with the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. Can you explain a little bit what that means, since this is going to students to take a look at? Let me rephrase that. But what is that program? How does that benefit students? What does that do for COC?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning is probably not something students have firsthand experience with because it's geared toward faculty and staff, mostly faculty. And the idea is, to have in-house COC folks who help other COC folks learn best practices for teaching, classroom management, classroom assessment techniques. And so we have a group, we do our skilled teacher certificate for faculty. It's a year-long program and it helps improve some of the teaching skills. We've got a teaching skills course, like a big, course that kind of really does the sort of basics, right? Like lesson plans and syllabi and really, really important stuff, especially for new folks. And then we've got, the culturally responsive teaching class that's in there. And all of these, what they do is they're trying to make better instructors. Yes. And so better instructors, better learning environment for our students, and our students can hopefully reap those benefits.
And that's why I wanted you to bring it up, just kind of explain that, because students who are listening to this may not know what that would have meant, but indirectly all our students are benefiting from your work and all our faculty and staff's work who are going through these programs, right, in the classroom, whether it's face-to-face, how it used to be, or our topic today, transitioning online. So for many of our athletes who tune into these, you might recognize Robert Wonser, or at least his name. Teaches in sociology quite a bit, face-to-face, online. You had mentioned some of your favorites are social problems, Soc 207, women's studies, Soc 200, criminology, Soc 250. And we asked you to come on and talk to us today about, for many students, their world, everyone's world has now shifted, right? The thought process in our day-to-day life. For many students who went from, hey, I was face-to-face, that's how I knew how to learn, right? Visually, I needed to see instructor, talk with classmates and so forth. I'm now online, right? And Robert, we think, Matt and I, you do a great job of both, right? In terms of working with our students, and what we've heard and what we see is, hey, whether it's face-to-face or online, you're going to get some great instruction and great information and a great lesson from Robert Wonser. So we wanted to bring you on. And one thing you mentioned, I'm going to paraphrase is, what may bring somebody, or what may attract somebody to online learning is the rational reasons, right? Hey, it's convenient, the schedule worked for me, I can kind of come in and out when I need to. But what we don't see is oftentimes it also provides input from students who wouldn't necessarily do it in the face-to-face class, right? Who have the reservations of asking questions or engaging because they're embarrassed or not used to it, whatever the case may be, but online can bring that, to them easier. So I like how you phrase that. We're gonna go ahead and get going. One of the questions we have, the first and foremost is, what does it take to be a successful online learner? I mean, there's a lot of different things in your mind, the main things that a student needs to do, whether it's time management and working their diligence, skills, techniques. What do you see, from your students who make them a good online learner?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that's really what it comes down to, because teaching or taking a class online is a very different experience in a number of ways than taking it face-to-face. So I think we're kind of, as a species, we're really good with the face-to-face, right? We're good with seeing, making a connection, a human connection with our instructors, with our classmates, for my case, with my students. And that kind of flows a little more kind of intuitively in face-to-face. And so when you translate that to the online, it takes a little bit more effort to kind of get it, to kind of get that sort of human connection that's there. So for students, I think we often simplify it and we'll call it like time management or motivation or self-motivation. And those are important. But the way I see it, and this is probably my sociology training, is structures are invaluable. And so in a face-to-face class, you've got a student who's really good at following the routine. So they'll show up Tuesday and Thursday at 9:30. They'll be there. They'll pay attention. They'll take notes. They'll ask questions. And a lot of my student athletes are that way. They're really good. They show up consistently, and that's kind of the anchor that helps them, do what they need to do.
Yeah.
But in a face-to-face or in an online class, it's, you can go in at any time, any hour of the day, any day of the week. It's not a Tuesday, Thursday thing where your head shifts into that mind space and you're in class at that time.
Yeah.
So, I wrote down as like a note that I wanted to mention self-motivation. But it's really about creating structures that create the right behaviors. So, and I might be getting ahead of myself, but
that's fine. That's okay.
One of the things I was thinking about that is like, how do you do that? Right. So I remember, and this is, I'm sure, something a lot of us can relate to. If you notice, like, so I would get like, Costco had these really great chocolate covered almonds.
Okay.
And so I get this massive container of them. Right. And they'd be in the pantry and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to have a handful. So I'd have a handful, but they're still in the pantry. So like an hour later, 2 hours later, I'm like, all right, another handful's all right. I'll be all right. And before you know it, you've eaten, half the container, right? Way more than you're supposed to. And what I kind of came to realize is I set myself up for that bad behavior, right? Or bad behavior. I set myself up for it. I left them in a place that's easy to get. If I had to go drive to Costco and go wait in that monster line and buy them, I wouldn't do it. But because they're sitting there in my pantry, a 1 minute round trip walk, it's much easier to do that. Mm-hmm. And so that same insight, I think, helps to do the right thing in a classroom. So what I would say is, set an alarm, right? Get up like normal, like it's a regular school day, even though you're staying at home. Routines, I think this pandemic has really highlighted how essential routines are.
Yeah.
And how we usually just take them for granted. But those routines are what allow us to be productive. They're what allow us to get what we need to get done. So, I put in here, making your own routine, like so set an alarm, like in my classes, this semester, they were mostly Tuesdays and Thursdays. So if you're used to Tuesdays and Thursdays, set an alarm on Tuesday, get up, take a shower, right? Eat breakfast, do what you would normally do, and then show up to class and put aside that block of time to do classwork, to do schoolwork. So setting reminders on a phone, that kind of thing, I think that's invaluable. Like we need that sort of stability.
Yeah. I mean, I would piggyback on that. Matt and I have had many conversations, discussions, talks, whatever, in the last month or so. Many of our athletes, at least student athletes at COC, they've had structure in their lives for the last 2, 3, 4 years going into high school, right? Where they've known exactly what classes they're taking, when they're taking them. They got practice. They have to go get trained, go get treatment with their athletic trainers, weight room, when they eat, when to work, all these sort of things. And like you said, now all of a sudden, at least for a student athlete's perspective, that's gone, right? No longer, Matt can attest to this. Do they need to make sure they get their butts in the weight room at 2:00 before, before they're doing up downs or whatever the case may be? Now it's like, hey, I don't have to do that at this time. And you're right, that under trying to comprehend that, it could be tough.
Absolutely. And one thing I did want to note too is this is hard for everyone, right? This is like,
yes.
So, and I've done like individual office hours with my students, and so many of them talk about how they're feeling this, right? I'm feeling, adrift. I'm feeling unmotivated. I'm having all these troubles. And I want to then, but I want to like really emphasize that everybody's feeling that. Like, we think of it as like an individual issue, like, oh my God, this is something that's affecting me. Mm-hmm. This is something that's affecting all of us. And, we all just recognizing that goes a long way, I think.
100%. Yeah.
I got a question to kind of add on to that. You hinted on it towards, when you're talking about the almonds and the chocolate, for a lot of our student athletes, like would you say, like how could they go about like that urge? Like when we don't have this routine and they have the choice in front of them, like I can go over here and I can play Call of Duty, or I can go over here and do my homework. And, it's instant gratification. Their buddies are probably on it, but their homework's over there. Like, what would you say to a student that's kind of like in that predicament?
Well, I'm actually saying that right now to my second grader who's wanting to do the exact same thing. She's like, there's video games here. Why would I do schoolwork? Um, I don't know. I always think of it like, you do your chores first, you do your homework first, then you get to play. And so if you set aside like, oh no, it's 10 a.m. that's school time. Like if in the same, you have to try to continue that routine as best you can. So one of the things I was saying to another student was try not, if you can, this is not a luxury all of us have, but if you can, don't do your schoolwork in the same room as the Xbox, right? With the Call of Duty there. Because it's gonna just like with the stupid almonds, right? It's gonna keep calling you until you go over and play. And then this one, no one's gonna want to hear, like none of us. But put your phone in another room, like turn it off, put it away. Because research is clear. If it's just out, I made this mistake right now. I didn't move my phone far enough, and I heard it ringing. I'm like, what's going on? You got to get it away because it will beckon you. That's its job, is to steal your attention away. So, I mean, to remove as many distractions as possible, and again, it's easier said than done, right? Not everyone has an office that they can go to or a workspace in their house. But if you do, take all the steps you can to get rid of those bad choices from like continually knocking at you until you oblige. So, that's what I would do. And then, so like, okay, cool. If I do my work after 3 o'clock, like a normal school day or whatever, I've got time to play Call of Duty. I've got time to do these other things I want to do. I don't know if that's how feasible that is, but that's what I try to do.
Perfect.
Well, and it kind of leads into the next to talk about is, in your perspective, obviously teaching a lot of classes on ground and online, what are some of the things, some of the differences you see from your perspective as an instructor, pros and cons, or I guess tips and techniques that, hey, what can you take if you excel in learning or in the learning environment in the classroom, how can you take that to online? We kind of already touched upon that, right? Like in the classroom, for the most part, you're not going to have your phone out in front of you. You shouldn't be, right? You're definitely not going to have an Xbox in the classroom, right? And that sort of stuff. So what are some of the things that you can advise students or give them some tips and techniques for that?
Yeah, I think so. Part of this falls back on us as faculty, and that we kind of think of like mimicking what we do in a face-to-face class in the online world, mm-hmm. and it's not quite the same thing. No matter how we try to replicate it. So I think part of it is on us to make sure that we have built classrooms that are conducive to online learning in the online space. Most of us aren't really taught that way. We're taught very little about teaching, unfortunately, but the teaching that we do get is usually in the face-to-face world. And so we try to then, just copy it and do it in the online world. And it doesn't always translate that way. So the thing I come back to a lot is, as an instructor, we need to build in sociality. We need to build in social interaction, because all learning is social learning. We talk about how we learn. We always learn from others, even if we're reading a book, we're learning from somebody else who wrote the book, right? There's always this sort of interaction component there. And so well-designed online courses ideally will take those insights and leverage them to make a learning environment that uses that. The problem, of course, is that, for most of us, we didn't get to design these courses that way. The ones that were shifted over to remote. Uh-huh. So in the absence of well-designed courses that way, try to be as human as possible. That's what I always say. So be human. So in the face-to-face world, that means actually engaging in those discussions. I think sometimes discussions are kind of like, oh, okay, I agree with you, Albert. What a good insight you had. and it doesn't have to be that way. We can really, truly learn from each other. And again, all learning is social learning. We can learn from one another. I think the other thing too is reach out, use the opportunities. So come to office hours, come to the Zoom meetings if your professors are doing those. Take any opportunity. I welcome my students. Like I like it when they just drop in and they just say, "How's it going?" Or a student was like, "How are you doing, professor?" And I'm like, "Oh, no, most people don't ask me that because it's usually like I have a question on the assignment or something, right?" But there's so much value in just being human. That's why, Albert, when you said this, hey, do you want to do this? I'm like, of course I do. Matt and Albert, of course I'll chat with you too. Like I could use the opportunity to be human. So any opportunity, that's a kind of a little nugget, I would say. Any chance you get to be human, be human.
And it's funny you said that because Matt and I had, we chatted with Jeff Forrest yesterday, and we talked about, the main topic was communication, and he talked about just, communicating, like we're all, I don't know if he said the exact words, we're all human, but something along those lines of, listen, students, staff, coaches, faculty, we're all human. We're all going through this. Just reach out if you see how you're doing. So that's awesome you mentioned that.
Yeah. And there's really there's real therapeutic value in just hearing other people go, "Oh my God, I'm going through the same thing." Yes, totally. Like I feel that, like, absolutely. And it eases some of that tension, some of that anxiety. And then, you can kind of move on into the actual substance of what you're trying to do, right? The course material or whatever it is.
I think that we're kind of leading into it. And I come from, we're especially work with like football players and, students who are not comfortable being in a classroom, just understanding that, hey, like we're all human, like we're all going through this together. There's no bad question. Like we have a lot of students who are scared, like they're scared to go get tutoring. They're scared to ask their teacher questions. They're scared to, write something on the discussion board because they're afraid of how it's going to be perceived by everybody else. And I think what you just said kind of hints on that. Like, there's no reason for that, especially in an academic atmosphere. So.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we're here for. We are here to learn and to dispel, misconceptions. So, I honestly I never read a discussion prompt and go, or response and go, "Wow, that was a dumb question." Like I'm not even just saying that. It's literally never happened. I'm like, "Oh, cool. Like, absolutely. Here's an opportunity to learn more." And, one of the things that, I tell my students, but I'm not sure that they fully grasp is we learn too. I'm reading a book right now on the things that the best college teachers do. And one of the things they're talking about is they're constantly learning. And I've always made this observation that I've learned more since grad school than I did in grad school. Mm-hmm. And so like I got all these really cool nuggets of information in grad school. It's like, okay, great. But then students asking me questions prompted me to connect those things in ways that I had never thought of until somebody asked that question that they probably thought was dumb. And it ended up being, really insightful in a way that, we talk about in sociology and the education literature, we all have different funds of knowledge, different life experiences that come from our cultural backgrounds, our class backgrounds, our gender-based backgrounds, all these different experiences. And I don't think of those questions that they always do. Like it just never would have crossed my mind. And that doesn't mean it's a bad question. In fact, in some ways it's more interesting because it would have never dawned on me to ask that question. And so not only are they asking a question or writing some experience that I don't have, they're helping me learn. And if they're helping me learn, they're helping other students learn and they're helping themselves learn. And it's truly a win-win situation. So, if the students say that, tell them not even close. Like it's the opposite. Those questions are fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah, and just to piggyback off that, I had a little visitor come in, so I got a little distracted. But even in online, and any instructor has different ways of teaching online, and students have different ways of trying to comprehend online learning. For me, maybe this is your case, Robert and Matt, like with the discussion boards, not to make them so mundane, which is that's the reason I like to have students respond to each other, right? To bring in that feedback is, listen, there's many ways of learning, and you're right. I'm going to learn from my students just like they're going to learn from each other and vice versa and all that. So I think online allows that to happen in a very natural way. Exactly.
And that's the in that response I gave to you earlier that you mentioned, that's exactly what I was getting at is, in a face-to-face classroom, we don't have time to literally go through 1, 2, 3, 4, all 35 students and get a response. Unfortunately, I mean, it would be great if we did, but we don't. But in an online classroom and a discussion board, we do have that luxury. And it's fantastic because so much more knowledge is generated out of that classroom discussion that just doesn't happen in a traditional face-to-face class.
Gotcha. So I think, for all students listening, hey, make sure you're reaching out and like Matt said, no question is a dumb question. You may have heard that, as cliche as it is. Definitely ask and reach out and so forth. We're kind of running towards the end of what we've touched on a lot of great things, and you have Robert and Matt and I have chimed in to piggyback off your comments, but we mentioned this earlier, whether before we start recording it or not, everyone's world has shifted, right? Especially, in terms of learning and education. Some students have already been learning online. For some students, this is brand new. For some, they're like, hey, is half of the load was online, half the load was on ground. Moving forward, right? And we don't know how long this is going to last, right? We're not trying to speculate here. So stuff like that, we're not scientists in that regard. Summer right around the corner, fall's going to come around, whether we're back in session at school in the fall or moving forward, it's going to look different, right? Online seems like it's going to be much more relevant in terms of learning online in classes. What's some bit of advice that maybe, or something that you want to touch on that you haven't, or you want to kind of maybe expand on that you've mentioned? What kind of advice can you give students moving forward? Like, hey, finish off the spring, we've got summer, fall's coming. Here's what you can do to learn.
Yeah. So some of it kind of bled into my other answers, but reach out. I mean, don't I think sometimes some of the students who I've had the hardest time reaching since this whole shift happened, I think the reason why they're not being as responsive, and some of these were like in the face-to-face who were, they would raise their hands often, aren't quiet as a mouse in the online world. And I think it's because they can't really articulate what the problem is, right? It's not, they didn't fall down and break a leg and they, can't get to class, right? So they can't pinpoint that. And so I think there's a reticence to address this sort of, in sociology, we call it anomie, this real disconnect when society's norms are no longer in play. And that's exactly what we've seen with the social structures being upended and the things that structure and anchor our lives being uprooted. And so there's not really, especially if you're not well versed in this, there's not a word for that. It's just like, I don't know, I kind of feel bleh. And if you're experiencing something like that, just reach out and say, I'm not sure what it is, but I'm just kind of like lacking in motivation, or however you might want to describe it. And sometimes just talking about it can help. Sometimes hearing that other people are experiencing the same thing can help. Like one of the things I've started to do is I've done more videos for my classes.
Yeah.
Because again, it's one of the ways I can think of to be human, is to talk to other people and, have the whole, as best we can, face to human face, voice, talking. And, for students, obviously, they probably don't want to do videos, but come to office hours, just talk and talk with anybody. Talk with, you have friends in classes, ask how they're doing, ask how they're managing this, because it really is, in sociology, we'll call it, it's a public issue. It's not a personal trouble. And because we're so isolated because of this, we experience it as though it were personal, but it's really not. It's rooted in society and how everybody's experiencing it. And so, talking to others, staying connected, the things that tend to do us in are lack of human contact. And so it's not even like, I haven't had a single student who went, I don't get the content. I don't understand what you mean here. It's always stuff like, I'm just having trouble finding motivation, or I'm having trouble, being cooped up inside, or whatever it might be. And so I think the remedy for that is as much connection as you can. So like, if my students are listening, I doubt it, they've heard enough of me, but if they are, come to those drop-in office hours. Just like, I'm seriously sitting here with my computer open and Zoom open going, man, I hope somebody comes in. Like, I could sure use, I've seen my family enough, I could sure use some other contact. Take all those chances you can to be human.
Yeah, and I mean, even for students like you mentioned, you're dropping on office hours, but even if that office time isn't conducive for their schedule for whatever reason, hit up your instructor and say, hey, I can't meet you at, whatever, 9:30 a.m. Can we set up a Zoom meeting for later today? Or who knows, right? Like I got an email.
Absolutely.
Student.
Yeah. I mean, I think faculty are craving their students too. Like we had a school meeting the other day, and that was a big theme. People were like, I miss my students. Mm-hmm. I know it doesn't always feel that way to students, but we like you guys. We like, interacting with you. And so we're missing out too.
Yeah, I got a text message from a department chair in a different department. We were going back and forth about some things, and that's one of the things he said. He's like, I miss going to school and seeing people and talking to people face to face. So this is the next best thing we can do, right? Is Zoom and so forth. So, Matt, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add or throw in.
No, that was awesome. I think that there's a lot. I mean, you're going to have I know you're going to have a few of our students or your students are going to be watching this from the athletics page too. So that was awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. Well, hello to my students.
Yeah.
And hello to all students, but mine especially.
Yeah. Like I mentioned, Robert, Matt and I, when we were talking about this idea, we're like, dude, Robert is awesome. All our student athletes love taking your classes on ground, online. So, our student athletes are going to watch this. You either had him or you probably will be having them soon at some point, in terms of your ed plan and so forth. So Robert, we appreciate you, man, interacting with us and seeing our faces on here. Best of luck with everything. You're doing a great job, I think, with the Center for Excellence in Learning, and then just in your classes and so forth. And, we are, Matt and I, big fans of sociology and the instructors and your school and humanizing learning. I think with our students you guys do a great job of that.
Thank you. It's definitely a mutual feeling. So likewise from me and from what I understand too, the entire social department. You guys are great, and I'm glad you're doing this. This is selfishly, again, this is a great opportunity, but it's also, I think it's great for the students.
Good. Cool. All right, man. Well, we'll see you. Be safe, and we'll go from there.
All right. Take care, guys.
See ya.